The dust always gets in my lungs first, that stale, heavy scent of decay and forgotten lives. I've walked through countless derelict hospitals, crumbling asylums, and houses where the laughter died generations ago. Each time I tell myself it's just my imagination, the wind playing tricks. But then I hear it. That faint whisper just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam, calling my name. Or was it calling someone else? Tonight, I'm not just recounting urban legends. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 terrifying truths, experiences that clawed their way into my reality from those places the living left behind, places I barely escaped. The first time I truly questioned my sanity, questioned whether my fascination with these forgotten spaces was a death wish, was in the old St. Jude's Children's Hospital. It had been abandoned since the late 60s, a relic of a time when childhood illnesses were often a death sentence. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something sterile but sweet, like stale medication mixed with old candy. I'd heard the whispers, the local legends about the children who never left. I always dismissed them as urban myths, fodder for thrill seekers. I was deep in what used to be the pediatric ward, the walls painted with faded, cheerful murals of animals that now looked grotesque, their painted smiles stretched into silent screams. Sunlight struggled through grime-caked windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced with the dust motes. I was setting up my camera, trying to capture the eerie beauty of a rusted rocking horse, when I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible hum. It sounded like a lullaby, just beyond the door leading to the nursery. My blood ran cold. I told myself it was the wind whistling through a broken pane, but the humming grew clearer, more distinct. It wasn't a human voice, not exactly. It was too high-pitched, too ethereal. It sounded like a music box, winding down, playing a tune I couldn't quite place, but one that filled me with an immediate, primal dread. I slowly moved towards the door, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The nursery was small, filled with overturned cribs and splintered toys. And there, in the center of the room, was a single, tiny porcelain doll. It was sitting upright on the dusty floor, facing the door, its painted eyes wide and empty. I knew, with an absolute certainty that chilled me to my bones, that it hadn't been there when I'd first scanned the room. My hand trembled as I raised my camera, trying to focus, but the lens fogged. And then, the humming stopped, abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. I stood frozen, straining to hear anything, to rationalize what I was experiencing. And then, from behind me, from the very spot where I'd been standing just moments before, I heard a child's giggle. It was light, innocent, but utterly devoid of joy. It was right next to my ear. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. I just ran. I scrambled out of that hospital, not bothering to pack my gear, not looking back. The memory of that giggle and the feeling of something tiny and cold brush past my leg as I fled still haunts my sleep. It was the first time I understood that some places don't just hold memories, they hold residents. That night after St. Jude's, I didn't sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sounded like that innocent, joyless giggle. It took me months to even look at my camera again, let alone step foot in another abandoned building. But the pull, the morbid curiosity, it was a sickness in my blood. I told myself it was a one-off, a combination of exhaustion and a hyperactive imagination. I needed to prove it to myself. I needed to go back. My next venture, a year later, took me deep into the Appalachian foothills, to what was once the Blackwood Sanatorium. Locals called it the breathing house because of the constant, low moan the wind made through its dilapidated structure. It had been a place for tuberculosis patients in the early 1900s, a place where people went to die slowly, far from their families. The air here wasn't sweet and sterile like St. Jude's. It was heavy with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something metallic like old blood. I arrived at dusk, the setting sun painting the skeletal trees in hues of orange and purple. The building itself was massive, a hulking stone edifice that seemed to sag under its own weight. Inside, the silence was immediate and profound, broken only by the crunch of my boots on fallen plaster. I moved through ward after ward, each one a mirror image of despair. Rusting iron beds, cracked porcelain sinks, peeling paint revealing layers of medical green and institutional beige. I was trying to document the architecture, the decay, trying to keep my mind strictly on the physical. I found myself in what must have been the main treatment room, a large space with remnants of surgical equipment and an imposing rusted iron lung in the corner. The light was fading fast, and I was relying more and more on my headlamp. As I panned the beam across the room, I saw them. Strewn across the floor, mixed with debris, were dozens of patient files. Yellowed, brittle pages detailing names, ages, diagnoses, and dates of death. A chilling record of lives extinguished. I picked one up, the paper crumbling slightly in my hand. It was a young woman, barely 20, died of consumption. As I stood there, reading the faded script, a cold draft swept through the room, though all the windows were either boarded or too high to be open. And then, faintly at first, I heard it. A cough. A wet, hacking cough, followed by a shallow, desperate gasp for air. It wasn't a sound from outside, it was right there, in the room with me. My headlamp beam darted around wildly. Nothing. Just the shadows, the dust, the decaying equipment. I told myself it was the old building settling, or my mind playing tricks again. But then it came again, louder this time, closer. A series of ragged, suffocating coughs that sounded like they were coming from just behind the rusted iron lung. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I could almost feel the vibration of the coughs in the floorboards. I knew with a sickening certainty that I wasn't alone, and whatever was making that sound, it wasn't human anymore. My eyes were locked on the rusted iron lung, but my headlamp beam was still playing across the patient files. The coughing intensified, a wet, rattling sound that seemed to tear through the very air. It was a sound of absolute agony, of lungs failing, of a life desperately clinging to a breath that wouldn't come. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive silence that followed each racking spasm. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to scramble out of that place, but a morbid fascination, a desperate need to understand, held me captive. Slowly, painstakingly, I shifted my weight. Each creak of my boot on the fallen plaster sounded like a gunshot in the cavernous room. The air grew colder, heavy with a phantom chill that went beyond the dampness of the building. I could almost taste the sickness, the despair. The coughs continued, a rhythmic, suffocating struggle, now seeming to emanate not just from behind the iron lung, but from within it, as if some poor soul were trapped inside, perpetually fighting for air. I forced myself to move, one agonizing step after another, my headlamp beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom. The closer I got to the hulking metal machine, the more intense the coughing became, echoing off the high ceilings surrounding me. It wasn't just one cough, it was a chorus of suffering, a symphony of dying breaths, each one more desperate than the last. I could hear the faint, gurgling sound of fluid in lungs, the desperate wheezing, the shallow, frantic gasps. It was unbearable. Finally, I was right next to the iron lung, its cold, unforgiving surface reflecting the weak beam of my light. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to steady my nerves, and slowly, cautiously peered around the side. Nothing, just dust, more debris, and the dark, empty wall behind it. There was no one there. No body, no shadow, no physical source for the horrifying sounds. But the coughing didn't stop. In fact, as I stood there, staring into the void, the sounds seemed to swell, to fill the entire room. It felt like 1,000 dying patients were suddenly all around me, their desperate breaths pressing in on my chest, stealing my own air. I felt lightheaded, suffocated. The metallic scent, like old blood, was overwhelming now, stinging my nostrils. Then a new sound cut through the cacophony of coughs, a soft, wet gasp right beside my ear. So close I felt a phantom spray of moisture on my cheek. It was the sound of someone taking their very last breath, a final, shuddering release. And then, silence. An absolute, profound, terrifying silence that swallowed all the previous noise whole. My legs gave out. I stumbled back, scrambling away from the iron lung, away from that place of terminal suffering. I didn't grab my camera, I didn't care about the files. I just ran. I pushed past rusty beds, tripped over debris, my headlamp beam bouncing wildly, showing me only fleeting glimpses of the horrors I was leaving behind. I burst out into the twilight, gasping for fresh air, the scent of damp earth and pine needles, a sudden, welcome relief after the stench of illness. I didn't stop running until I was miles down the winding mountain road. The image of that empty space behind the iron lung, and the sound of that final wet gasp burned into my mind. I understood then that some places don't just hold residents, they hold the very essence of their suffering, echoing endlessly in the void. That night, after the Blackwood Sanatorium, I didn't sleep for weeks. The sound of that final gasp, the stench of sickness, it clung to me like a shroud. I told myself I was done, but the channel, the comments, and my own twisted curiosity wouldn't let me go. I needed one more story. I chose a remote farmhouse, a place where an entire family had simply vanished decades ago. I went there seeking emptiness, a quiet horror. I found something far worse. I was in the master bedroom filming when I heard it, a faint creak from downstairs. Then another, slow, heavy steps ascending the stairs, growing louder, closer. I froze, my hand instinctively gripping my camera, its weight suddenly a cold, useless lump. The steps stopped just outside the bedroom door. The air grew heavy, thick, like breathing through wet wool. I could feel a presence, a cold, oppressive weight pressing against the door. A thin sliver of light, not from my headlamp, but from somewhere inside the room, flickered across the opposite wall. It was too faint to illuminate anything, but it danced like a distant candlelight. And then, a sound I will never forget. A low, guttural growl right on the other side of the door. It wasn't human. It was animalistic, filled with a primal, malevolent hunger. My breath hitched. I backed away slowly, my eyes locked on the door, my mind screaming. The doorknob began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. A metallic scrape, then a soft click as the latch disengaged. I could hear my own ragged breathing, loud in the suffocating silence. The door began to swing inward, a sliver of darkness widening into a gaping maw. And there, standing in the doorway, was not a ghost, not a shadow. It was a figure, tall and gaunt, shrouded in what looked like faded, tattered clothes. Its face was obscured by shadow, but I could feel its eyes on me, burning holes into my soul. The air turned icy, stealing the warmth from my bones. A heavy, sickening stench filled my nostrils, not of decay, but of something far worse, stale blood and ancient malice. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, caught in the beam of its unseen gaze. It raised a hand, long, skeletal fingers reaching out towards me. And as it did, the faint light on the wall brightened, just enough to show me not a human hand, but a claw, tipped with dark, jagged nails. And then, from the depths of its obscured face, a voice, not human, not animal, but something ancient and parched, whispered my name. Not a question, but a claim. A sound like dry leaves skittering across stone, a promise of eternal cold. The clawed hand reached closer, its shadow swallowing the last flicker of light on the wall. I didn't think, I didn't breathe, I just reacted. A primal scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate, as I stumbled backward, away from the doorway, away from that thing. I don't remember falling down the stairs, only the jarring impact, the burning in my lungs as I scrambled through the forgotten living room, past the peeling wallpaper and the dust-shrouded furniture. The front door was a blur. I didn't stop running until the farmhouse was a distant, dark smudge against the horizon, until the taste of fear was replaced by the sting of cold night air. I made it out, barely, but something followed. I feel it now, lurking in the shadows of my own home, a faint chill, a whisper that isn't the wind. These places, they aren't just abandoned. They are alive, and they are hungry. They don't just hold memories or echoes of suffering. They hold entities, things that wait, things that watch. And sometimes they let you leave, but they don't let you go. Every creak of my floorboards, every unexplained chill, every flicker of a distant light, it reminds me. It's always there, waiting. Have you ever felt that? That cold breath on your neck when no one is around? That creeping certainty that you're not alone, even in the safety of your own home? Tell me, because sometimes knowing you're not the only one who's seen the darkness makes it a little less lonely, or perhaps a little more real.